All right, so John, let's get into it. Resident Evil 2. The game came out in 1998. It's been 21 years. I have not played it before. You have. Keep it extremely broad for this intro, John. Is the game good?
My bottom line up front, this is a fucking amazing video game. This is a wonderful game. Resident Evil 2 for the PlayStation, of course, released in 1998. One of my favorite games of all time, and my favorite game in one of my favorite franchises. Resident Evil 2, the remake. And I want to stress for anybody who may not be aware, this is a full-on remake. This is not the same game that released in 1998. This is by and far a much better, much more streamlined, much more enjoyable experience,
Right.
and it is now
Fixed camera is gone.
fixed camera, and may it never come back. And this is now my favorite game of the franchise and one of my favorite games of all time. So yeah, you could say this is a pretty good video game.
Wow. Okay, so John is coming on strong. He's got that connection to it. I also think it's a really, really good game. I'm not quite that far. I don't know if it's one of my favorite games of all time, but yeah, this game is really fucking good. I kind of went into it a little bit skeptical because I worried I was gonna need that throwback nostalgia to really sink in. But the game does not require you to really know any previous games. It doesn't require you to know the old game. It feels really fucking fresh, right?
I'm so glad that you love this, because I was hoping for our co-review that my biggest fear for this was going into it thinking, okay, I'm gonna love it, Zach's gonna hate it, and then we're just gonna butt heads for the entire 20 minutes or so that we're gonna do this. But I am thrilled that you love this game. I'm really excited to talk about it, and I just kind of want to start off by saying, God damn, Zach, this is one good-looking game.
Yeah, it looks really good. Re-Engine, is this the second game using that? Resident Evil 7?
I believe so. I believe Resident Evil 7 was the first game to utilize it.
Okay, that's right. And the new Devil May Cry is going to use it, which is out very soon. So yeah, it looks great. You played on PlayStation Pro. I played on Xbox One X. It looks good. It's probably one of the best looking games I've played in quite some time on there. It looks good. So we're going to keep this, as I've said, spoiler light, but we need to give you some background on it. So the bulk of the game really is grounded in this police station that many of you have seen in promotional shots and in the demo, right? I mean, it's largely in this station, John, right?
It is. The main game itself, and again, a little addendum to what Zach said. We are going to avoid spoilers, but there are going to be some general story beats that we discuss, especially for people who are very familiar with the original game that released on PlayStation. Yes, the main crux of the game takes place in and around and under the police station.
Right, and so what we'll say is we will talk about things that were in both versions, but new stuff that John is experienced for the first time in this game, will not bring up here. We won't spoil that for you.
Perfect.
So, in the police station that a lot of you guys have seen, you have to explore and kind of find various puzzle pieces to progress, and it's really where I started to fall in love with this game's tone, more so than Resident Evil 7, another game I love, because this game, to an even greater extent, understands that you can have really creepy, scary atmosphere and keep B-movie tone, and I loved that about this game, right?
I agree. It's a real splatterfest of a game. When you mention the B horror tones of it, it's not just in the music and the writing, but also just the explosive gore in the game. This is a gooey video game, and it's got some of the it's got some of the best dismemberment physics, and I feel that's really weird that that's a thing, but it's got some of the best dismemberment physics I've seen since Dead Space.
There's something really interesting where John talks about, this gore is, it really elevates it and kind of takes it out of being, this really grim, oppressive experience to be something yes, it can be goofy and it can be funny, but, if you turn a corner and there is, for example, a licker, which is this crawling enemy type that can't see but reacts to sound, and they click and they move around they click in a way that reminds me a little bit of clickers from The Last of Us. They are some creepy things. So you can go from one room where you're laughing as these, shambling, kind of goofy AI zombies struggle to get to you, and then you go in the next room and it's just this clicker walking slowly down a hallway listening for your footsteps.
Well, some of the most tense moments of the game for me were walking underneath a clicker, or I'm sorry, a clicker. Now you got me saying clicker. Walking underneath a licker, hanging on the ceiling.
Excuse me.
Hanging on the ceiling, walking underneath it, and just praying that it doesn't hear you. Like, or there are a few instances, and I won't spoil when, but this is standard for Resident Evil. When you use an item or you put together a key item, and all of a sudden a licker will burst out of the wall or burst out of the ceiling and just almost give you a heart attack. I yelled a couple times. I was very audible at times when I was playing this game because it's just, oh man, it's just a. But one thing I don't like, Zach, and we talked about Resident Evil 7, and of course it bears mentioning that the series has shifted back to a third-person over-the-shoulder view as opposed to that first-person view that Resident Evil 7 utilized, and I feel like this is more effective. Like, I love Resident Evil 7, but I like the. I don't know. I like the over-the-shoulder third-person playstyle better. It just feels more like Resident Evil to me. It gives me those Resident Evil 4 vibes. So, from a gameplay perspective, I feel like this is a more complete experience than Resident Evil 7 was.
Yeah. No, and like that kind of comes into like the level and world design too, right? Like Resident Evil 7 certainly had puzzles, but this is the return of like complicated, you are going to need notes. I played this game with a notebook to keep track of notes so that I wouldn't constantly have to shuffle through through the in-game's kind of clunky note system. This is a game that requires you to really pay attention to your environment. Like there are tons of little locks that open up lockers, and they'll have their code scattered on a computer password or just scribbled on a whiteboard. And the game really begs you to pay attention to its really creepy. It's not just environmental dressing, right? Like there's a lot of context here where you can put together what happened in a room. It's really something.
I'm really glad you brought that up because there was more than one moment when I just saw like 3 letters, for example, scribbled on a wall, and I was like, oh, how about that? And with no context given whatsoever for what it is, it's just like, hey, 3 letters on a wall, and then an hour later you run into a wall locker, and I'm like, oh, I'll put those 3 letters in, and boom, all of a sudden, that's the combo, and I was like, oh shit, I love that kind of organic world design where the game doesn't specifically hand you a piece of paper and say this is the code for the locker on the on basement level 2. These are things, and playing with a notebook is exactly what I did in 1998. So that aspect of the game hasn't changed at all. These aren't the kind of hold your hand puzzles that we saw in Resident Evil 7, where it's like, okay, fit block A into fit the round block into the round hole, and there you go, you'll open the door. These are things you really need to think about, especially on the second run stuff. It doesn't hold your hand even nearly as much as the first playthroughs do.
Right. So moving on from world design, which is again a return to form for people who like the classics, let's talk about how this game is different from the original, not in a spoiler sense, but how does it feel in control? Obviously, there's not that fixed camera angle. We're in that third-person Resident Evil 4 style. But John, how does it feel in control in your opinion?
Well, I mean, it feels like I'm playing Resident Evil 4 again, only I can move and shoot, which is great. It doesn't feel as loose and I guess flimsy as like a Resident Evil 6 did. This game controls really well.
It doesn't ever get this bad, but it does kind of remind me of Rockstar games where you really, there's no quick turning around. You do kind of have to do a short circle to kind of do a 180 at times. And getting around corners and getting around hordes can be frustrating. The game, despite not being that first-person claustrophobic thing from Resident Evil 7, the game's tight corridors and controls can make it really claustrophobic and occasionally frustrating, but for the most part, it feels really good.
There are a lot of little details I picked up at this game that just really blew me away and helped immerse me into that world, helped me feel like, the Raccoon Police Department was a real place and that Leon and Claire were real people. A good example, and this is just something small that I happen to pick up on, but when you're in a dark environment and Claire or Leon are holding up their flashlight and their pistol at the same time, as you're walking, if you brush up against something, Leon will pull his arm with the flashlight closer into his body, as will Claire. Or if you're squeezing through if you're squeezing through a tight spot as you're walking, and you've got your pistol up and your flashlight up under your arm, your arms will constrict. Leon will move his arms in order to get around whatever obstacle that is, and it's very small and very subtle, but it's little stuff like that that really, really drew me into the world. Zach, can we also talk about the sound design in this game?
Yeah, it's a really creepy game. So this is, again, if you want zero spoilers, this won't be it, but this is a character who has been in the game since the original. Tyrant, John, you call him Mr. X. he is the unkillable tank character, and yes, he's scary when he's right in front of you. But John, talking about sound design, he is also scary when he is nowhere near you.
So one of the things I love about this game is the fact that you can hear Mr. X storming throughout the police station, no matter where you are, and you can tell. You can get a pretty. I got pretty good at being able to tell where he was based on the sound and volume of his footsteps. And I'll tell you what, it has been a long time since a game has left me this stressed out and just generally sweaty about a character like Mr. X. There were a couple times when I'm walking up the stairs and all of a sudden I can tell by his footfalls he's either right above me or right below me, but I can't see him. And so I'm freaking out and looking up the stairs, looking down the stairs, looking up the stairs, looking down, waiting for him to pop out. And like there were a few times, Zach, where he popped into the most inopportune moments, like in a room with 2 liquors in it.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, or he would punch you right into a zombie who would then,
bite you immediately.
Yeah. So there were those moments where I was like, oh, Mr. X, why? But for the most part, he's even more terrifying than I remember him because, in the original game, Zach, you may not be aware of this, but when you left a room, he was gone. And he would pop up again later. In this, he just follows you from room to room. Yeah. The only way to get rid of him is diving into a save room. That's it. Oh man, what a great. But if I remember correctly, you had some issues with Mr. X.
Yeah, and I think this is the difference between the perspective of how familiar we are with this game, but I just generally don't like character types or enemy types that's like, yeah, this is the unstoppable tank, and you can't kill him. I find that to be kind of frustrating as a player because, I mean, when you're in a situation when the game gives you guns, it's not a type of horror game you have to run away from everything. I find it frustrating when everything else can be taken down, but this character can't. And it just becomes, it goes from being oppressive and creepy to like, okay, let me wind this back a little bit. One of the most effective things about Alien Isolation was that you could fight back, but it also appeared rarely enough that it was always scary when it showed up. So here, with Mr. X always feeling like he's kind of lurking around the next corner when you're in the police station, you get to a point where he's no longer scary to me, and I'm just annoyed because he's kind of a pest. Because like you said, I know I need to get to this room, I know this room has these really difficult enemies in it, and he's just going to exacerbate the situation. So for me, the Tyrant, Mr. X as we're calling him here, he's a frustrating enemy type, and maybe the only one I don't like.
So I never actually, in the original game, I never bothered trying to unload my weapons into him to see if I could stop him because I was always just trying to get the hell away and conserve ammo, and I didn't do that here. So you may be able to stop him in his tracks. That's the one thing I'm not sure of about the original game. So it's not like a Jack Baker situation in Resident Evil 7, where you can pop a few shots into Jack Baker and he'll lie there for a while. He'll just fall down and he won't move for a while. Which is an interesting, and that's an interesting contrast, right, Zach? Like I feel like you prefer the character of a Jack Baker that is not so much of an unstoppable force. And I don't know. Do you feel like Jack Baker was a more balanced kind of carrot stick chase mechanic?
Tyrant or Mr. X as a character feels the most dated thing about this game.
Interesting.
I would say it's a dated enemy encounter, and I would say that Mr. Baker in Resident Evil 7 is like the evolution of this idea.
Interesting.
And so like this is like the only way I feel. Well, not the only way, but this is the most obvious way that this game, you can tell that its roots are a little bit out there. It's an older title for sure, or not title, but design.
So I actually have a question for you, Zach.
Sure.
When you started playing the game, so you've been through Leon's campaign and Claire's B campaign.
Yep.
Without getting too spoilery, how did you feel about Claire's campaign versus Leon? Like which one did you prefer?
Sure. So let me, before I answer that, I'm going to pull it back a little bit. So we've been speaking in broad terms about these A campaigns and B campaigns. Also, so when we say B or second run, this is the game's equivalent of a New Game Plus. So you can play through as Leon and Claire in normal mode, or you can play them as New Game Plus. And New Game Plus is different encounters, different placement, and also scarcer resources, which is ammo, guns, and healing items. So Claire's experience, to me, I thought her story beats were more interesting and a little bit less generic than Leon's, but I found her weapons to be worse, and I think that was exacerbated by the B-sides mode just being decidedly harder.
Yeah.
Right? Second run is just a hard game mode.
And I do want to point out that there actually is a hardcore mode that harkens back to the original, excuse me, that harkens back to the original Resident Evil experience, in which not only is it more challenging, but you actually need ink ribbons for the typewriters in order to save. I'm actually going to start that up tonight. I'm very excited, but that's because I'm kind of a masochist when it comes to difficult game modes. But I want something that is going to try to get me even more of that original Resident Evil 2 experience. One thing I will say, Zach, I tend to agree with you on that. There was enough, and I feel like this is a good segue for me to say that as somebody who played the original game and has now been through almost all 4 scenarios in this new version of Resident Evil 2, if you are relying on your knowledge of the past game to get you through this, don't. I'm telling you right now, don't do that. Things are different. Item placement is different. Entire story beats don't happen, and some of them are replaced by new ones. Do not go into this thinking that your old codes and locker combinations or knowledge of enemy placement or item placement is going to help you, because I can tell you right now, it most assuredly will not. I was thrown for a loop multiple times during my play.
Well, and I'll say that too with the second run or B-sides for this game too is. It'll be interesting. So no matter what, you always start the game in the police station, but there are various routes and doorways that are opened at different times for Claire and Leon and in the second run versions. And so, for example, there will be things like, oh, this side of the building is open a lot sooner than the other side, which is a reverse. And also, the codes to unlock certain items and the puzzle solutions are also slightly different. So it can be fatiguing because they are very similar, Claire and Leon's paths, but there's enough variation there that it still feels like it's worth playing both. Like, I think you'd be doing yourself a disservice if you played through it once as one of the characters and never revisited it. Like, it is worth playing both characters.
Well, Zach, and I remember you telling me in a DM that you were much higher on the second portion of Claire's B-side than you were the first part. Like, that's when you really started warming up to that.
Oh, yeah, and that might just be because certain enemy types were introduced very early in Claire's B-side that were like, okay, I do not have the gear to fight you yet. So as you progress, it gets a little bit better. Listen, New Game Plus is a challenge, and Second Run is a challenge. But for the most part, I mean, they feel like they're essential. And like, just to keep this brief, we don't want to get into spoilers, but the game does have some challenge modes that aren't full-fledged modes, but they're like nice challenges. And that's the fourth survivor and also the tofu character, which are returning things from the original, right, John?
They are. So then that goes for fourth survivor, which stars Hunk, who is a member of Umbrella's Alpha Team. And it's basically just like a run-through, kill enemies, try to get out thing. Just like it was in the original. And then Tofu is basically just a survival mode. Those two modes are in the game. I've done a little for Survivor, and it's really enjoyable. I have a question for you, Zach. Sure. Is this a game that you see yourself revisiting in the future?
Oh, yeah. And that's primarily... So I have played Leon's first run and Claire's second run. I am tempted to do the reverse and do Claire's A run and Leon's B run.
Ooh,
so the game in its results screen, you can kind of look at your stats. The game lays it out like you should do Leon AB and Claire AB, yep. And that's something I plan on doing.
And there's a lot of content here. There's a ton of content.
There's a lot of content here. And like you're saying, there's that hardcore mode. And just one quick thing I want to touch on. The game does feature an assisted mode, which if you're thinking to yourself, okay, I want to be in on the zeitgeist that is Resident Evil 2, but I'm a little worried it's going to be tough. They have assisted mode, which is easier, less enemies, they're weaker enemies, you heal, and also there's a little bit of auto-aim, which should really help. So if you just want to talk about Resident Evil 2 and not have an oppressive situation, this game is accessible.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Resident Evil 2, for me, is obviously the best game I've played in 2019, but we're 20 days into it. But I would not be surprised if we see people putting this in top 10s, top 5, and potentially Game of the Year slots at the end of the year. Resident Evil 2 is a game that I think we're going to be talking about for a long time. Despite being 21 years old, I think that despite some of its older design choices, this game will be influential on horror games we will be playing. It will bring back old trends. It's something that I really got to recommend most people check out.
And honestly, Zach, I can see Resident Evil 2 kind of being the model for the Resident Evil franchise going forward.
Yeah. It is a good time to like Resident Evil, it is a good time to like Capcom, and it is a good time to be Capcom.
I needed this game to be good. And what I got was an amazing trip down memory lane with one of my favorite games that and it's been improved in literally every single conceivable way, from visuals to sound to gameplay. Although I will say everything about this game is wonderful. I think it's a masterpiece, and it's right now, I can guarantee you, Zach, just like you said, it's going to be in my conversation for Game of the Year.
It's incredible. All right, guys, that will do it for our review of Resident Evil.